I never thought I'd find myself crouched behind a row of hedges in front of my own house at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, watching a stranger carry grocery bags through my front door. My name is Walter Pruitt, and I work nights. Have for the better part of 17 years. I'm a shift supervisor at a chemical plant outside of Shreveport, Louisiana. 4 nights on, 3 nights off, rotating schedule that changes every 6 weeks. I'm 51 years old, widowed going on 4 years now, and I own a 3-bedroom ranch house on Cloverleaf Drive that my wife Carol and I bought together back in 2009. After she passed, I thought about selling. Couldn't do it. Too many years of her in those walls, so I kept it, and I learned to live alone in the house we'd shared for a decade and a half. Living alone suited my schedule fine. When I'm on my work rotation, I leave around 9 in the evening and I don't get back until 7 or 8 in the morning. I sleep until 3, putter around the house, then do it again. On my off days I fish, watch football, do yard work. Quiet life, small life, but mine. The first sign something was wrong came from my next-door neighbor, a retired teacher who has lived on Cloverleaf Drive for 30 years and knows every car that belongs on this street the way most people know their own family's faces. He knocked on my door one afternoon in early March, right around the time I was getting up and making coffee. "You got somebody renting out your spare room?" he asked. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He scratched the back of his neck, uncomfortable. "There's been cars I don't recognize. Different ones. Parked in your driveway mostly at night. Last Saturday I counted 3 of them, and lights on till past midnight. I figured maybe you had family visiting. Didn't want to pry." He'd waited almost 2 weeks to say something because he didn't want to be nosy. I've never been more grateful for a man overcoming his instinct to mind his own business. I told him thank you. I told him I'd look into it. I went back inside and stood in my kitchen with my coffee going cold and tried to make sense of what he described. Multiple cars. Lights on past midnight. On nights when I was at work. My first thought was that someone had broken in. My second thought was stranger and worse, that this was happening regularly, with some kind of pattern to it. A break-in is a one-time thing. What my neighbor was describing sounded like a routine. I went through my house slowly, room by room, the way you do when you're looking for something you can't name yet. The living room looks normal. Kitchen looked normal. But in the 3rd bedroom, the one I'd used as a catch-all storage room since Carol passed, full of boxes I hadn't opened in years, something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it immediately. Then I realized the boxes had been moved. Not dramatically. Whoever did it had tried to put them back, but the dust patterns on the hardwood floor told the truth. Several of the larger boxes had been shifted to the perimeter, creating a clear open space in the center of the room. There was a folding card table I kept leaning against the far wall. It was now set up in the middle of that cleared space. I stood there staring at that card table for probably a full minute. It had been on that wall since Carol's mother gave it to us for a Thanksgiving we hosted in 2013. I hadn't touched it since. Somebody had. I didn't sleep well that day. I lay in my bed running through possibilities and not liking any of them. My house locked properly. I'd changed the locks myself about 8 months after Carol died. New deadbolts, new doorknob hardware, the whole thing. I had 2 copies of the keys, one on my keyring, one in a lockbox bolted to the wall inside my garage, because I'd locked myself out twice in the year after she passed and I wasn't going through that again. The lockbox. I got up, went to the garage and opened it. My spare key was there, but when I picked it up and turned it over, I noticed something I wouldn't have caught if I hadn't been looking for it, a tiny smear of something waxy along the teeth. The kind of residue a key impression kit leaves behind. I've watched enough true crime to know what that meant. Somebody had made a copy. The question was, who? The lockbox wasn't visible from outside the garage. You'd have to know it was there to find it. Which meant whoever had done this had been inside my garage at some point, looking around. I started going back through who'd had access to my house and garage over the past year. Repairmen mostly. I'd had the HVAC serviced in October. A plumber came out in December for a slow drain. In January, I'd had a handyman come out to fix a section of fence that had blown down in a windstorm. His name was Terence something, referred to me by a flyer left in my mailbox. I'd watched him work for about 20 minutes, then gone inside when it got cold. Terence. I'd paid him in cash because that's what his flyer said he preferred. I hadn't asked for ID. I hadn't verified anything. He was a guy with a truck and a tool belt and the right flyer at the right time, and I'd let him walk around my property for 2 hours. I didn't confront anyone yet. The reason was simple and practical. I didn't know who I was dealing with. If Terence had a copy of my key and was letting someone into my house on a regular basis, there were others involved. Changing my locks tonight would stop the access, yes, but it wouldn't tell me what had been happening, how long it had been going on, or how many people knew about my house and my schedule. I needed to understand the full picture before I showed my hand. So instead of calling a locksmith, I drove to Best Buy. I bought 3 indoor security cameras and a video doorbell, the kind that saves footage to the cloud and sends motion alerts to your phone. I also bought a small digital voice recorder, the type journalists use because I'm old-fashioned and I like a backup. That afternoon, while I was certain no one would be there, it was a Thursday, I was starting my work rotation that night, exactly the kind of night when whoever was using my house would expect it to be empty. I installed everything. 1 camera in the living room tucked behind a large framed photo of Carol and me at our nephew's wedding. 1 in the hallway between the bedrooms. 1 in the storage room, angled to cover the card table and the door. Doorbell camera at the front. I went to work that night with my phone in my breast pocket and the camera app open. At 9:52 p.m., my doorbell camera sent a notification. I stepped away from my station, went to the break room, and opened the app. A man was at my front door. He looked to be in his early 40s, wearing a dark jacket, baseball cap, carrying a small cooler. He used a key, my key, walked right in, like he owned the place. I watched through the hallway camera as he went straight to the storage room. Over the next 40 minutes, 2 more people arrived. A woman, probably late 30s, and another man, younger, maybe late 20s. By 10:30, there were 3 strangers sitting around my card table in my storage room, and I could see chips. Poker chips. They were running a card game in my house. I recorded everything. Watched the feed on and off for the rest of my shift. The guests arrived between 9:30 and 10:30. They played until around 2 a.m. Then they left. All of them orderly, no mess I could see. The man in the cap was the last to leave. He did a quick walk-through of the house. I watched him on camera, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind him with the key. I went home at 7 a.m. to a house that looked exactly the way I'd left it. But I knew better now. Over the next week, I documented 4 more sessions, always on nights I worked, always starting around 9:30, always the same man with the cap letting people in and out. The number of players varied, sometimes 3, sometimes as many as 7. I started recognizing faces. There was a heavy-set man with a red beard who came to nearly every session. A woman in her 50s with short grey hair who laughed loudly at everything. A younger guy in a Pelicans jersey who showed up twice. But the man with the cap was the constant. He was the organizer. On the 6th night I had footage, he arrived early, around 8:30, with a woman I hadn't seen before. She was carrying a laptop and a large tote bag. They sat at my kitchen table for almost an hour going through something on the screen. I zoomed in on the camera footage as much as the resolution would allow. She had a legal pad, and I could make out handwriting, numbers mostly, and what looked like a list of addresses, multiple addresses. My house wasn't the only one. I took screenshots. I printed them at the office supply store the next morning. Then I made an appointment with the Shreveport Police Department and walked in with a folder full of evidence, my phone, and 11 days of cloud-saved footage. The detective I met with, a careful, methodical man who took notes by hand in a small spiral notebook, reviewed everything without a lot of expression. Then he looked up and said, "How many nights a week did you say you work?" 4, I told him. He nodded slowly. "And the sessions always coincide with your work nights? Every time?" He wrote something down. "That tells us someone knew your schedule." He was right. And that brought me back to Terence and his flyer. I told the detective everything I'd remembered. The handyman. The flyer in the mailbox. The 2 hours he'd spent on my property in January. The lockbox in the garage. The detective asked if I still had the flyer. I didn't. But I remembered the name of the business printed on it, Ace Home Repairs, with a phone number. The detective ran it. The number was a prepaid cell. The business had no license on file with the city, but the detective found a photo of the truck I'd described. I'd mentioned a white F-150 with a magnetic sign on the door, in footage from a neighborhood camera 2 streets over, on the same day Terence had come to do my fence. The truck had been seen in 4 other neighborhoods in the weeks prior. The detective started working the case. He asked me to keep documenting, keep the cameras going, not change my locks yet. He wanted to catch the organizer in the act with enough evidence to make the charges stick. I went back to my routine, worked my nights, watched my phone, sent the detective regular updates. 2 weeks into the investigation, the detective called me. "We've identified your organizer," he said. "His name is Raymond False. He's got a prior for illegal gambling and was flagged for a similar operation in Bossier City 3 years ago. The woman with the laptop is his girlfriend. They've been running this circuit for at least 8 months. We've identified 3 other properties they're using. 3 other properties they're using. 3 other properties, all owned by people who worked nights or traveled regularly. Raymond False. The man with the cap. He'd been walking in and out of my house like he paid rent on it, hosting card games, taking a cut of the pot, doing it all on a schedule built around my absence. The sting happened on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after I'd first walked into the police station. I was at work for real, watching the camera feeds on my break, when at 10:17 p.m. I saw the familiar motion alert from my doorbell. Raymond let himself in. 6 players followed over the next 40 minutes. The game started. At 12:45 a.m., I got a text from the detective. "We have them." I drove home from work at 7 a.m. and stood in my driveway in the early morning light. The street was quiet. 2 police vehicles were still parked up the block. My neighbor was at his mailbox, watching me with a look that asked everything without saying a word. I gave him a nod. He gave me one back. Raymond False was charged with illegal gambling operation, criminal trespassing, unauthorized entry, and conspiracy. His girlfriend was charged with conspiracy and accessory. Terence, whose legal name turned out to be Carlton Marsh, a man with 2 prior fraud convictions in Texas, was charged with breaking and entering and criminal conspiracy for making the unauthorized key copy. During questioning, he admitted that Raymond had paid him $300 for the impression kit and the copy, plus $50 for each additional property he scouted and accessed. There were 4 properties in total. The other 3 owners were a night shift nurse, a long-haul trucker, and a woman who traveled for pharmaceutical sales. All of us had been selected specifically because our schedules were predictable and our absences were regular. Carlton had targeted each of us through the same method: a flyer, a job, access to the property, a few minutes alone to find a spare key or make a copy. The trial took 8 months. I testified twice. Raymond's lawyer tried to argue that since no property was stolen and no damage was done, the charges were excessive. The judge disagreed. Raymond got 18 months in state prison and 5 years probation. Carlton got 14 months. The girlfriend got a suspended sentence and probation after cooperating fully with the prosecution. The other 3 property owners and I were each awarded restitution, though the amount barely covered the cost of my new security system. The locks I changed immediately after the arrest, and 3 months of elevated anxiety that no dollar figure accounts for. I still live on Cloverleaf Drive. I didn't sell, but I changed everything about how I live here. The lockbox is gone. I have a smart lock on every exterior door controlled from my phone, with a unique code that I rotate every 2 weeks. I put motion-activated lights along the full perimeter of the house. The cameras are still up, and I have no intention of taking them down. My neighbor has my cell number pinned to his refrigerator with explicit instructions to call me directly, not the neighborhood association, not a voicemail, if he sees anything that doesn't look right. I had a conversation with my nephew about all of it a few months after the arrests. He's a practical kid, early 30s, works in IT, and he said something that stayed with me. He said, "Uncle Walt, the scariest part isn't that they got in. It's that you never would have known if your neighbor hadn't said something." He was right. If my neighbor had stayed in his lane, minded his business the way most people do, Raymond False would still be hosting card games in my storage room every Tuesday and Thursday night. The whole operation was engineered around the assumption that nobody would speak up, that neighbors don't talk to each other anymore, that people who work nights are invisible to their own communities. They were right about that mostly, which is exactly why it almost worked. There were things I learned from this that I didn't know before. The first is that a spare key is only as safe as the people who know it exists. I'd told a friend years ago about the lockbox in the garage in case of emergencies. I don't think my friend told anyone, but the lockbox was visible to anyone who walked into my garage with their eyes open, and I let a stranger spend 2 hours on my property without supervision. That was the crack they needed. The second is that your utility bills tell a story. After everything came out, I pulled my electricity records for the previous 8 months. My usage on my work nights was measurably higher than on my off nights. Lights, the small space heater someone had plugged in the storage room, a television I later found had been moved slightly in the living room. Subtle, but there. I hadn't been watching. Now I do. The third is that contractors and handymen who come recommended by a piece of paper in your mailbox are not vetted by anyone. Call your county licensing board. Ask for license numbers. Get everything in writing. If someone prefers cash and has no verifiable business address, those are not quirks. Those are flags. The fourth is that illegal operations of this kind almost always involve more than one property. Carlton had been doing this for over a year across 2 parishes. If you discover something wrong with your home, there is a meaningful chance your neighbors are experiencing the same thing, even if they don't know it yet. The detective told me that when we finally identified all 4 properties, none of the other 3 owners had noticed anything unusual. They found out because I came forward first. The fifth is that a card game in your storage room leaves less trace than a house guest who uses your shower and eats your food. Raymond Falsey's operation was specifically designed to be invisible. Clean, contained, and gone by 2 a.m. I would never have caught it from the inside. The only reason I found out was because my neighbor saw the cars from outside. I think about that a lot, about how much of our sense of security is built on assumptions we've never actually tested. I assumed a lock was enough. I assumed a lockbox was private. I assumed a stranger with a legitimate-looking flyer and a truck with a magnetic sign was what he appeared to be. Every one of those assumptions was reasonable, and every one of them turned out to be wrong. Carol used to say I was too trusting for a man who spent his nights around heavy machinery and chemical tanks. She meant it as a compliment and a warning at the same time. After 17 years, I finally understood what she was getting at. My neighbor came over for coffee a few weeks after the whole thing racked up in court. We sat on the back porch and he told me that he'd almost not said anything that afternoon. He thought maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe it was a nephew visiting or a friend I'd given a key to while I traveled. He didn't want to make assumptions about another man's business. I told him I was glad he'd made an exception. He laughed, a short and quiet laugh, and we sat there for a while in the yard that Carol had planted and I'd been tending alone for 4 years. The azaleas were blooming early that spring. She would have noticed that. She kept track of things like that, the way my neighbor kept track of strange cars on the street. It's the people who pay attention that make the difference. Most of the time, we take them for granted until we need them. Then we realize they were holding something important all along, something we didn't even know was at risk. Check your spare keys, watch your utility bills, learn your neighbors' names, and if something feels wrong, say something, even if you're not sure, even if you're afraid of being wrong. The people running these operations are counting on your silence. Don't give it to them.